You're listening to Retail Disrupted, a podcast that explores the latest industry developments and the trends that will shape how we shop in the future. I'm your host, Natalie Berg. Hello and welcome back to Retail Disrupted. We are now halfway through November, and that means there's really only one thing we can talk about on today's show: Black Friday. Love it or loathe it, Black Friday has become a permanent fixture on the UK retail calendar. So today, I'm going to talk you through a few predictions and general observations around Black Friday 2023. The first thing we need to call out, and forgive me for stating the obvious here, but we need to acknowledge that Black Friday as a standalone day or a standalone weekend of deals and discounts just doesn't exist anymore. What we have now is Black November. I'm recording this episode on Tuesday, November 14th, and Black Friday is in full swing at a lot of UK retailers. John Lewis, Currys, Boots, Homebase, Holland & Barrett, Robert Dias, pure plays like Very and Wayfair, and I know this from personal experience, West Elm and Monica Vinader are definitely on sale. John Lewis is a really interesting one. They started Black Friday earlier than ever this year. They launched their deals on November 4th, and earlier in the month they were using the strap line, that Black Friday feeling all month long. I thought this was interesting because we in the industry know that there has been this Black Friday creep where deals and discounts get earlier and earlier every year, and they seem to last over a longer period of time. So I thought what was interesting about John Lewis was seeing such a big high street brand be so clear in communicating that message to their consumers. They're clearly trying to help customers to spread the cost of Christmas, and they clearly see an advantage in getting there before the rest of the high street's on sale. So clearly they see this early mover advantage. But I think there's also a risk that shoppers don't take the bait. And, as shoppers, we know what happens every November. We know that more deals are around the corner. We know that, other hot shops will be on sale soon. So there is that risk. And I think that it's a challenge for retailers to get that balance right. And we also can't forget that retailers are starting their Black Friday sales early because they are sitting on a lot of stock. We know that consumer demand has been muted, it's been subdued. And that's not just because of strains on household budgets, but also because of the weather. And it's very easy for retailers to blame the weather when things go bad. And it's very easy for retailers to credit the weather when sales are good. But there is no denying that the unseasonably warm weather we've had this year has been disastrous for a lot of retailers, especially a lot of fashion retailers. All of the retail CEOs I've spoken to recently have said it's basically been slow since September. Now, that might have changed over the past couple of weeks because the weather has finally turned and people are now thinking about buying, winter coats and that sort of thing. But it has been a very slow start to autumn and winter. So I think that's one of the reasons why retailers have gone exceptionally early this year with their Black Friday sales. They need to clear this excess stock. And, from a consumer's point of view, this is fantastic news. There'll be plenty of bargains out there, and I'm sure consumers will be ready to snap them up. It's also worth pointing out that even if retailers haven't started their official Black Friday sales early as the likes of, John Lewis and Boots and the others, what we have seen is a lot of retailers trickling deals throughout the month of November. So I'm going to pick on Argos for a second. On their website, if you go onto the website right now, it says, Black Friday is coming. Why wait? Get hundreds of price promise deals now. Well, as we just discussed, we are going to wait. Consumers are going to wait because they know that more deals are around the corner. But we have seen a lot of this kind of messaging this year where retailers are not just offering price promise deals like in Argos's case, but we're seeing a lot of 48-hour flash sales and early access or exclusive discounts for those more loyal customers. So I think Black Friday has become a lot more targeted. It's less of a kind of scattergun approach where, a few years ago it was 20% off everything. And don't get me wrong, I have had a couple of those emails already, and I won't name and shame. But and actually, just one other point to call out here. Helen Connolly, the CEO of New Look, was quoted in Retail Week making exactly that point, that they're not going to be doing blanket discounts, and Black Friday has to become more targeted. It has to be more strategic. So I thought that was interesting to hear a CEO actually call this out. And it makes sense because that's not a very sustainable model. You're just, giving away margin. So that I thought was interesting. But it's also it's really kind of reassuring to see that retailers are becoming smarter and more strategic in how they go about Black Friday with these exclusive discounts for, again, either for their loyalty members or those who've signed up for their newsletter or follow them on social media. So again, it's a great way to reward customers for their loyalty and ensure that you're not just offering those discounts to anyone. So I think it's a really smart thing to do on their part. That said, I think from a consumer's point of view, the plethora of deals, the many different ways that retailers are branding them is confusing, it's overwhelming, and it makes it really difficult to know when to actually pull the trigger and start spending. There's so much to interpret here. You've got flash sales, price promises, early access, pre-Black Friday sales. It's a little bit too much. I personally find it really overwhelming. And I think in a normal year, it is easy to get swept up in the frenzy of Black Friday. But then when you factor in all of these additional deals that are happening at different times throughout the month, what it does is it creates that extra FOMO factor, that extra fear of missing out. And so I think what we're going to see is buyer's remorse is going to be really strong. People are going to spend because they don't want to miss out on the deals. And then once the craze of Black Friday is over, once calm and rational thinking is restored, we are going to have a lot of stuff that we don't want or don't need. So as usual, retailers need to be prepared for a mountain of returns. The big day for returns this year is apparently the 28th of November. So retailers, make sure your stores are fully stocked and ready to process those returns. This is a perennial problem for retailers. There's a huge financial cost to these items being returned because we know that once an item's returned, it's very unlikely that it can be resold at full retail price. There's also a huge environmental cost because a lot of these products ultimately end up in landfill. The other thing I just wanted to briefly highlight on the topic of returns is the fact that some fashion retailers have started charging for returns, something we've covered on the podcast before. And it'll be interesting this year to see whether or not that impacts customer decisions in terms of whether they shop in store versus online. I don't think it'll make any difference. I think, again, consumers will get swept up with the craze of Black Friday and just buy. I think when it comes to returning those items, what we're going to see is a lot of traffic coming into store because we know that for most retailers, with these new returns policies, it's still free to return an item in store. So I think that's something else that retailers need to bear in mind, that they might see more footfall than normal in early December, sort of late November, early December, as buyer's remorse kicks in and shoppers do everything they can to avoid paying that fee to return the item by post. Okay, so let's switch gears now and talk about this growing skepticism around Black Friday. I think there is a lot of distrust around the Black Friday deals. People want discounts. They don't want the illusion of discounts. And we all know it's fairly common practice for retailers to raise the prices of certain products just before Black Friday and then slash the prices on the day. There's been some really fantastic reporting around this from the consumer group Which, and every year they show that an overwhelming majority of Black Friday deals are actually the same price or even cheaper at other times of the year. And I think the fact that this reporting has gotten so much coverage has really awakened a lot of people to the fact that their deals are not always deals. And it can be really hard for shoppers to separate the hype from the reality. But I don't think this is going to stop them. I don't think they're going to let their cynicism of Black Friday get in the way of their spending. The lure of a bargain is just too great. It's really only this time of year when the entire high street is on sale. So I don't think it's going to stop them. But I think shoppers are definitely going to do their homework. They're definitely going to use the technology in their back pockets and make the most of things like price checker apps, things like Price Runner or Camel, where they can check the pricing history of individual products. And I also think shoppers are going to try to outsmart retailers by getting the most bang for their buck and using things like cashback credit cards or cashback sites like Quidco, for example, where they essentially get paid to shop. Overall, I think retailers can expect a really strong turnout this year. I think it's going to be a bumper Black Friday. Consumers have a pulse, they are ready to spend, and they are hungry for bargains. Retailers, meanwhile, are starting early, the deals are prolific, and we're even seeing some brands who never participate in Black Friday get involved this year. That tells me they're sitting on inventory that just hasn't moved in this tough climate. So I think Black Friday is going to be big, and it's going to be boosted by the fact that last year's Black Friday was a little bit of a damp squib. Now, I'm not sure if any of you remember, but last year the ONS reported that retail sales volumes were actually down in the month of November. So they were down just slightly. They were down 0.4% compared to the previous month. That is pretty disappointing when you consider that the entire high street is offering discounts. But remember, we were right smack in the middle of the cost of living crisis. Consumers were being extra cautious. They were really tightening their belts. And that's not to say that we're out of the woods now. That's not to say that the consumer has totally bounced back. But we're definitely past the worst, and we're definitely in a better position than we were 12 months ago. We also had the World Cup last year, and I remember that because England was playing the US on Black Friday itself, and it was a big deal in our house. So that would have also kept people away from the shops as they were busy watching the game. But overall, it's worth calling out that we do have pretty weak comparatives. And if we look at more recent data, there's further evidence to support this idea that we are going to have a bumper Black Friday 2023. We don't have the ONS numbers yet, but we do have the BRC data, and that showed that spending has actually slowed during the month of October. Now, this is value terms rather than volume terms, so an important distinction. The BRC data showed that retail sales were up 2.5% in October, which is down slightly from the 2.7% rise in September. And more importantly, it's below the 12-month average of 4.2%. Now, as with all data, you can look at this one of two ways. Either consumers are hunkering down and it's going to be a terrible Christmas, or consumers are just being smart because they know the Black Friday deals are coming. And why on earth would you pay full price for something in October when it's going to be discounted a few weeks later? So yeah, I think you can get a sense of how I interpret that data. I think consumers were just delaying purchases. They were holding out for the deals. And Primark, in fact, said a few weeks ago in their trading update that shoppers are out there and they're shopping enthusiastically. That was the term they used. So yeah, I think consumers want value for money and retailers are ready to offer the discounts. The question is, at what price? We can measure the success of Black Friday in terms of driving footfall and driving sales immediately after the event. But we won't get a sense of the margin cost until the new year. And that's arguably a far more important metric. Thank you for listening to Retail Disrupted. If you enjoyed this episode and would like to support the podcast, please leave a rating or review or share it with others. It really makes a difference.